Okay, are you guys seeing a PowerPoint presentation?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, great. All right, I hope you've been enjoying the conference so far. It's been informing and empowering and everything else. I wanted to switch gears and move to a more you-focused thing as opposed to the system and the country and healthcare in general, all its problems. I wanted to talk about your personal finances. Disclaimer, I'm not a financial advisor. I don't have any financial disclosures. No company is paying me. So this isn't a real personal finance talk. It's about optimizing your lifestyle so that we can have that launch pad that's been mentioned, so that we can have that that lily pad that was mentioned. Okay, so, you know, graduating from residency, I wanted to get a good job, get my boards done with, and start traveling the world, which I did do. Those were all great. But I also wanted to address what I saw as an oversight in my education thus far. I didn't have any like financial background. No one took the time to say, you should learn about your finances. These are things to know. I remember briefly like one forced lecture before I graduated med school where they said, you have to pay these loans. And I'm not alone in my financial ignorance. Only 34% of Americans can answer like 4 pretty basic financial literacy questions. And that little bit of knowledge, that low baseline of being able to answer these 4 questions does have like a positive impact down the road. So they did a study where they looked at people in year 1, and then 6 years later, the people who had this kind of minimum baseline of financial literacy, they were able to have a higher financial satisfaction in their lives, better able to absorb like a financial shock, which was a sudden expense of around $2,000, and they had already started their retirement planning. So for me in particular, that had some other ramifications because their data showed that for women and for people making over $60,000 a year, that impact was even greater when it came to long-term planning for retirement. So trying to correct these educational deficiencies, I read a couple of books straight out of residency. I read The White Coat Investor and Boglehead's Guide to Investing. And from the Boglehead's Guide to Investing, I wanted to understand market terminology better, different types of accounts and stocks and bonds and other things that kind of get tossed around if you're talking to a financial advisor or looking at an investment available to you at work. The White Coat Investor, I thought I'd heard was like marketed to us, aimed at us without specifically trying to sell you something. So I wanted someone who was just trying to help me as a physician, but wasn't gaining something from that help. And from Bogleheads, I totally got what I paid for. I felt, okay, I know how to check out these expense ratios. I know about these different types of accounts. I felt like better equipped to evaluate some assessments, to investments. From the White Coat Investor, I recognize now that he had a lot of messaging that is great and helpful. But at the time, my takeaways were, yes, you need to save some money, avoid lifestyle creep. But in order to do that, you needed to be married, live in the middle of nowhere, and live like a resident. And 3 out of the 4 of those things were not on the table at that point. So I did start saving. At that point, I started saving money in my 401k available at work, and I just had some savings that I set aside, but I didn't really have like a financial plan. Fast forward a few years, and I clicked into a clickbaity article on the New York Times about retiring with $1 million in your 30s, which was already pretty late for me. I was in my 30s by the time I became an attending, so I wanted to know what the tricks were there. So of course, because it is a clickbait article, they had people doing extreme things like dumpster diving, which I had no interest in. It made living like a resident sound luxurious, but the article did make me think more about this movement. So what is this movement? What is FIRE? So FIRE, or financial independence, FI is financial independence, FIRE is financial independence, retire early. And the basic premise of it is that you have enough money coming in to fill your expenses. Like, it's not just your W-2 check. You aren't getting that anymore. You have enough money coming in from your investments, enough returns to live independently, and you're not dependent on others. When you get messaging about retirement, when you get messaging about being financial independent, there are some wild numbers that are thrown out there, $10 million, things that don't seem attainable. But when you're looking at like the financial independence literature, they talk a lot about the rule of 25. So this is how you calculate how much money you need to be considered financially independent. So you have to calculate your annual expenses and you multiply that by 25. Once you have that number, you're supposed to take out 4% of that a year, and that is supposed to keep you going. And that adjusts for inflations and lots of things. Different people take kind of a different return for granted about this, and some people do it a little tighter with like 3.5%, but generally speaking, a lot of financial independence stuff will reference these two numbers. Right, so how can I get there? You know, you need to eliminate debt, you need to have a solid savings rate, you have to know and control your expenses, but you also need to stop living like a resident. And I think that last one is distinct from the others, because as a resident, it's harder to do at least the first two. So there's lots of different people in the financial independence space. One of them is Mr. Money Mustache. And in one of his articles talking about the easy math to early retirement, he has this great chart. And if this is your savings rate each year, this is how long it takes you to retire. If you're only saving 5% of your money, it will take you 66 years to retire. If you can save all of your money, you already don't need your income. You're already there. I don't think most of us fall into either extreme. So you can do the math based on what percentage you're saving. And there are plenty of calculators to help you figure that out. You don't have to do that part of the math. So I saw this as a worthwhile goal. And so I reconsidered that original live like a resident message. And so I had to think about what I thought was wrong with a resident's life. They have massive debt. They have no safety blanket, no really time to invest, room, time-wise to enjoy life, the money to do so. I'd heard a lot about pre-tax accounts. Well, not a lot. One of my co-residents mentioned something about an IRA once, and someone else is controlling how much and when you work. So these are things that I did not want to include in my attending life. So then I thought of different ways to address that. So from repaying and refinancing your debt, having an emergency fund, using your credit, and investing. I thought those were things that could help along this path. So as per Medscape, they do lots of fun reports. I'm sure you've gotten emails. Residents, half of them owe over $200,000 coming out of med school. Around a quarter of them owe over $300,000. This report, I think, was the report from this year, but every year when new attendings come out and come to my hospital, that number is higher and higher. And I hear $500,000. Apparently dentists often have that high level of debt as well. So the debt is real. And you can see that, again, another Medscape report, but this one on attendings. A quarter of attendings are still paying off some educational debt. The only ones that fall higher are mortgage, which a lot of people acquire when they become an attending, and car loan payments. And specifically for emergency medicine, we are the highest on this list. I don't know why. I don't know if there's a select group who are responding to this survey, but this list with us at the top doesn't correspond to our income relative to the other fields. But we are the most in debt. So right now, if you have direct loans, which are very common that people have direct loans, a lot of people with very large debt have private loans as well, but I'm going to focus on direct loans here. And that current interest rate is 6.28%. You might know someone who's had loans forever with some beautiful rate of 1.2%, but right now we're dealing with over 6% interest. So in terms of decreasing that debt, you need to consider refinancing. Again, just like there's calculators for figuring out your savings rate, there are calculators for figuring out what refinancing would do for your finances. You put in your current rate and the term there, you put in the new rate and the new term, and it will show you very specifically, you're saving this much money each month and this much money over the life of the loan. But what about government forgiveness? What about all these other things? You have to decide if it makes sense for you. I've thought of lots of different rules as to why you should refinance, from having more like the amount that you owe being higher than your income, which makes it a little more appealing for you to try and wait for some forgiveness. But the public service loan forgiveness, for example, is designed for you to pay off your loan in that 10 years. They're not hoping to have you still in the program at 10 years. So basing payments made the right way, which are income-based repayments, if when you do that math, if making 120 payments, assuming your income stays the same, if when you do that math, you would have paid off the balance of your loan, then you should consider refinancing. Because if you're going to have paid this off in 10 years anyway, you should pay as little as possible. If you refinance, you have a lower interest rate. So like the other slide showed, where that calculation was saving over $35,000, if you're going to have to pay this all off anyway, because in 120 payments, you would have covered the cost of the loan, then it makes sense for you to refinance. There are pitfalls to refinancing. I had already refinanced my loans, so this whole temporary loan moratorium was not available to me. My private lender did not give me a year and a half off of my payments. Outside of plague times like this, there are other periods of forgiveness or forbearance that you would get if your loans were still with the government that aren't available to you. So you have to kind of look at that whole picture. But for a lot of us, this is like our biggest debt. So it's important that you address this if you're aiming towards financial freedom. Another part of the residency trap that I wanted to get out of was feeling that I didn't have any kind of wiggle room. You know, a flat tire in residency was a huge disruption to my life and my budget. Right now, a reasonable emergency fund is 3 to 6 months of your expenses set aside that you can readily access. And again, you've already done the math on how much you spend a year. So you are dividing that by 2 or by 4, and that's the number that you want to have set aside. And I personally keep that in high yield savings. That yield used to be a lot higher, but interest rates are pretty low right now. All right, so other ways to save. This isn't just your emergency fund. This is talking about some of those pre-tax ways that we can save our money. These are things that are available to you depending on the type of employer. If for most of us, I think it would be a 403B working for a hospital, but some places it would still count as a 401k. And if you're working for hospitals, working for the government, a 457 is available to you. And then there's also the IRA. The first two would be with pre-tax money, and that you can save up to $39,000 a year there. So why are you doing this? Why are you trying to have these pre-tax accounts? You need to practice what the government practice. The government strongly believes in pay yourself first. So they pay themselves first, but it's with your money. So you need to get in on that like ground level of paying yourself first before even the tax man gets in there. Why do I need to do this pre-tax instead of doing it post-tax? One, doing it pre-tax will decrease your tax burden because you've taken that money out before taxes. So if you were making $1,000, you've saved $100. Now you're paying taxes on $900. Also, while your savings account will have grown by $100, your take home isn't going down by that same amount. So those are two of the advantages of using some pre-tax money. And these are just a look at the tax brackets. You can see where you fall. These are just the federal tax brackets. And so if you're in that highest tax bracket, before you take anything home, the government takes 37%. And that's not to speak anything of local taxes. And this is the state taxes. And as a New York City resident, there's another one. So so on that 37%, if you're in the highest bracket here, you're paying another 8% before you get to the city taxes. So you need to skim a little bit off the top. The way the government is paying themselves first, you take yours first. How do you do that? So 401k, 403b, this is designed for you to save money before taxes. You take it out now before taxes, you pay taxes on it later as it comes out because the government is determined to try and have their slice of the pie. You take this out and then through whatever company your job uses, you are able to invest. If your company offers any kind of matching to your retirement savings, this is how you usually access that. So in order to get a 2% match, you have to contribute up to 2% in your IRA. So of course, ideally, you are maxing this out. You're taking the full tax advantage of the $19,500 for the year. But if you can't save that much, you should at least go up to the match, because this is part of, when they pitched you that job, this is part of your compensation. So by not contributing to your 401k or your 403b, you're leaving that money on the table. 457, it's a little trickier, a little less well known. This is not the same kind of account. This is not meant to be something that you use in retirement. If you try and take out money from your 401k that you're not putting back, you pay a penalty on that. The 457 is a deferred compensation plan and not subject to the same rules. Once you sever your tie with that employer, you can have that money. The risk of the 457 is that it's bound by kind of the financial solvency of your employer. So for example, if you're working for hospital system X and they go under, the money that you took out, the money that you invested goes back to them and you go to the bottom of their line of creditors. But if you think, I'm working at ABM General, it's been around forever and it's super solid, then, but I'm going to leave in 5 years, this is a great tool. Why take the risk of this money that's attached to your employer? One, all of your money is attached to your employer. So if you think that this is a solvent company that you can stay working with, that should be a part of your math as to whether or not it's secure to have your money tied up with them. And also under the same principle of that money that was coming out pre-tax for your 401k, it's reducing your tax liability, and it's allowing you to put away a certain amount without missing that same amount from your take-home pay. So that kind of cushions the blow. And then when you take out that money, so I'm gonna go yachting around the Mediterranean in 5 years. I've been putting aside the 19.5 and it's grown a bit, now it's 120. I'm not gonna have any other work for that year. I have that money distributed to me. I'm gonna pay tax on that in this new bracket, up at the 24% bracket, as opposed to down at the 37% bracket. So those are some of the reasons you should consider our 457. And between those two accounts, like I said, you're already putting away $39,000. We have two types of IRAs, a regular IRA and a Roth IRA. A Roth IRA is with post-tax money, but it is limited by your income. So for people making over a certain amount of money, you can't directly go into a Roth IRA, but you can go in through the back door. Companies make this super easy. They'll talk you through it. There's videos on YouTube. There's many ways to figure out how to convert your traditional IRA into a Roth, and you want to do that like right away so it hasn't earned any money, earned any dividends, because then you'll have to pay taxes on that. So you put the money in there on Monday, on Tuesday, put it over into your Roth account. The Roth, being post-tax money, doesn't save you the tax burden on it now, but when you take that money out in the future, it's grown tax-free and you can withdraw that money tax-free. So that's already, we're up to 45,000. And these numbers that I'm using are all for people who are under 50. When you're over 50, you can contribute more to these accounts. I believe it's 50. All right, then we have that. You've done your math, you know whatever savings rate that's brought you to. But if you still want to save more money, if you still want to invest in a normal brokerage account, like a not tax protected account, automate those savings so that you're not thinking about it. It's not like, oh, well, I need to pay for this just off the top. You're, again, working on paying yourself first. Like I mentioned before, the high yield savings accounts aren't particularly high yield right now. It's not as bad as going with a major bank like Chase, where it's basically nothing. But if you go to NerdWallet or just Googled high yield savings accounts, you can find the ones with the best current rates. Okay, now I want to talk about something that is near and dear to me, and that is credit cards and miles and points and all of that. Before we can discuss that, this is with the major caveat that you are paying off that balance in full every month. You cannot gain anything from this system if you are paying the interest on these cards. The APRs are ridiculous, like 20-something%. I have no idea. I've never paid any of those high APRs because I just pay this balance off every month so that I'm just getting the benefits from these cards. So I'm talking about credit cards that you pay for. There's plenty of cards that you can get for free. I'm referring to credit cards that you pay for, and I choose to pay for them for the points and the perks. So my joy from this comes from traveling and how I can use points to travel for free, travel in way higher like classes of service than I am willing to pay cash for. And there's plenty of resources to help you do that. The Points Guy is my favorite, which is why I have this picture here, but there are many other people who make a business of showing you what you can do with points. So let's go through a real world example. I think right now you can find an Amex offer around this. So 100,000 points, I've seen it down to 75, I've seen it up to 125 when you sign on for this card. And those points can translate into real spending, right? So just on the Amex site, it shows you can use your points to cover charges, pay for things at checkout. If you're just shopping through their portal, you can get gift cards, you can book travel, you can transfer those points to travel partners. When you're on Amazon, if you have any of these cards plugged in, it will say, you have this as a points balance. Do you want to use it to pay for these speakers or whatever you're buying? These cards are not cheap. There are definitely cheaper cards than this. But this is just to show you, like, even with a big spend on a card, on buying a card, something that is definitely out of the picture to me as a resident, a $700 fee can still be worth it. If you look at these different categories, just as a standard, you get over $1,500 worth of stuff for this $700. And that's not counting the kind of alternating offers they have, where if you're spending $100, you get 20 back. If you're spending $500, you're getting 100 back, or just double points on something. So this is just like as their baseline. But you might look at this and say, I don't go to Equinox, I don't like Saks, I don't travel. So the two travel perks aren't there for me, this airline, this hotel, then this card isn't worth it for you. They have points that you can use for many great things, but maybe consider another card so that you can get the most value. I look at what do I spend money on? What categories are going to get me lots of points? So if your biggest expense is gas, find a card that pays you for gas. And they can do that in points, and some of them just give you cash back. So you can use that for other expenses. You're not using the credit card to buy extravagant things that you wouldn't otherwise buy, but by putting your normal purchases on the card that gives you the most for those purchases, you save money. You can cut out some of your expenses if it's something that's covered by like the included perks, or just using points to cover something otherwise on your card. And you don't have to do a ton of research on your own to figure this out. Again, there's great comparison tools out there. So you can say, my friend has this card and likes it, I'm considering this card, but they don't go to Costco as much as I do. So you can look and see if there's a card that's giving you perks for that outside of the Costco card. Two other things just to mention quickly. House hacking. I'm sure many of us in med school or residency lived in some kind of multifamily home, and we were helping to pay down someone else's mortgage. As an attending, you are in a better position to be the person sponsoring that mortgage and having someone else as a resident in the other part of your home to help pay down your mortgage. So it's not solely on you. And then I want us all to consider kind of the power of our white coats. Lots of people who have just like the slightest like relationship to medicine, use that white coat that they got, just like we got nurses, NPs, PAs. I don't know why that just happened. The slides are mostly done. They use that to have businesses, to have sidelines. If you are interested in other fields that you can use your medical degree to kind of advance yourself in, you should consider that. Some of the other talks that are going on now are talking about other types of careers that we can have, or other sidelines that we can have to earn money. So I think that's useful. And my last slide was just about resources, which included blogs like Mr. Money Mustache. Dr. Patel is here. He has a site as well. I had a link there. And there are many podcasts and blogs. Specifically for us, there's also Physician on Fire, and he shows like how the power of your savings can really change your ability to do something like take some time off or explore another career. That's the end of my formal presentation. Dr. Patel.
Great job. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That was a great presentation, really informative. And I think it just explains to us, a lot of us are coming out of med school are kind of intimidated by finances. And as I always said, if you can get through med school, this stuff is not hard. It just requires a little bit of concentration. And the earlier you do it, like you explained, automation, you don't have to think about it after the fact. So the more you can set up little processes and take advantage of these little things like the match, from your employer, things like that. It doesn't have to be that you don't spend any money, like, or you have to live on a residency income. No, it's just, we can do things much. It's not intimidating once you go into it. It just, that outside step is the hardest thing. The first step is the hardest thing for most people to take. But you did a great job explaining it.
Thanks. And I think once you start automating these things, like, again, we were previously living on a resident salary. Like, if you, add a little more to what's being withdrawn from your check, you adjust to that. So you can just, you know, I'm going to live on what's in my checking account, but what's in my checking account is what's there after all of my savings have already happened. And for me, that's usually an easy adjustment. It might take a month where I'm like, okay, I thought I had a little more wiggle room, but I adjust down. And that adjustment now pays like so many dividends later, because one, you're decreasing that amount for that 25 times your income, your expenses, right? If you were spending $1,000 and now you're only spending 800, your annual expenses have gone down by that much. You need that much less to continue living on, and you're that much closer to your financial independence number. Any other questions? Loan refinancing, credit cards. I can talk about credit cards for a really long time. If there's nothing else, I guess we can let them know that we're done, so that, you know, maybe some other talk can happen now. Thanks, everyone.